What's going on, Tamers? East here, and I'm worried. So I signed up for EVO Japan, the largest fighting game event in Japan, and it's happening next week. I signed up for Street Fighter 6 and Grand Blue Versus 2 games, and I haven't touched Street Fighter 6 at all. I am almost 1000% guaranteed to drown in pools. I am wholly unprepared. Grand Blue Versus though, different story. My Catalina is kind of nice. But in this video, we are not talking about fighting game tournaments, we are talking about card game tournaments, and for that, we are in our third week of the BT17 Secret Crisis meta over here in Asia. Fun side fact, we are actually 1 week away from the Digimon Liberator starter decks releasing here in Japan, and I don't know about you folks, but I haven't really taken a look at the cards too in depth. I've seen them as they've come out with the reveals day by day, but I haven't put the decks together to see what they're all about. That being said, I'm going to be doing a video covering both of those starter decks, so keep an eye on that on the channel. Make sure you're subscribed to know when it goes up. Speaking about the decks that are currently in front of us though, last week we saw for the first time in a long time a deck that finally eclipsed not only Numemon but also the armor decks, and that was the Rise of Blue Hybrid featuring the ancient Garurumon card released in BT17. And because of this, it feels like the game is kind of in this state of flux. So going into this week, I feel like anything could happen. And going into this week with that thought in mind, I was still surprised because one thing that I didn't think would happen did happen. So to find out more, let's take a look at some event results, a couple of key takeaways, and a close look at some of the decks that topped over the course of the past week. So every week on Friday or Saturday, I sit down and I go through all of the week's results and then compile the data. From there, I fire up Photoshop and make any new icons that you see before you here, if I need to make some. If I don't, then I fire up Tier Maker and I put together this nice chart that you see in front of you. And I was really happy this week doing this because I didn't really have to do much at all. If you look very closely, from last week's results, this list hasn't really changed that much. And honestly, going into this week, I figured that was the one thing that wouldn't happen. I figured coming into this week, something would change. Considering that we saw Blue Hybrid overtake not only Numemon, but the armor decks in a pretty swift fashion, my biggest check there was to see if this deck would continue to do well or if, counters would be found. And that really hasn't been the case so far. Again, this chart is nearly identical to the one last week, but there are a few small caveats. The first one is the emergence, or I guess re-emergence, of Tyrant as a force in the game. Now, he did receive a little bit of support in the form of the new Mega Kabuterimon that was released as a box topper for the BT17 set, but I didn't think that that card would make too much of a difference. And the one thing that really scared me about Tyrant Kabuterimon, especially going into BT17 and beyond, is that decks like Numemon, Blue Hybrid, and the armor decks all feature the Heaven's Judgment option card, which can be a really big problem for him. Tyrant Kabuterimon, of course, not affected by Digimon effects, but option effects are still on the table. That being said, stay tuned because we're going to see how this deck has changed since BT16 to adapt to the current game. The second big change from last week's results is right at the very end here at the in-training level, just this one win from this one little deck on the end here, which is this Rookie Rush deck focused on the Agumon cards. It was about a week or a week and a half ago, I think, on Twitter where I started to see a few of these lists for this deck pop up, and folks mentioned that it was surprisingly stable. With the addition of the new Greymon Secret Rare for this set, as well as the new Tai and Hikari Tamer, the 3-cost which allows you to play other Tamers on the board, this deck is surprisingly fast and surprisingly powerful. And stay tuned because we're going to take a close look at this one as well in a moment. The first list we're going to take a close look at today is going to be Tyrant Kabuterimon. The game state right now is so involved with these really strong level 7s, the Mega Aces, as well as strong level 6 Digimon that have the ability to destroy or bounce or DP minus or do whatever to destroy any of your Digimon on the board. And Tyrant Kabuterimon is one of the very few Digimon and one of the few decks in the game that just doesn't care. For the uninformed, Tyrant Kabuterimon has the special effect that whenever he's arrested, he's just not affected by your opponent's Digimon effects at all. So things like the Omni Ace just doesn't work on him at all. Things like Finner Lugomon, Takemikazuchi, he doesn't care about that at all. There's just so many things that he stops and shuts down that makes this deck pretty viable. You might be saying to yourself, well, East, you said it before, Heaven's Judgment is a card that is really, really scary for this deck overall. But with the new box topper Mega Kabuterimon, which you see 2 copies of here, he has the special combination of effects of Evade, which allows him to rest whenever he would be destroyed, and then he's not destroyed. And then the special effect of whenever he's rested, he's not affected by effects, means if he were to get DP minus, he would go down to 0, Evade would kick in, he would rest, and then immediately he would be unaffected by effects. So he would just stick on the board. One of the few Digimon in the game who's actually resistant to DP minus. Looking at the rest of the deck, there's some really interesting tech choices, especially once you get to the level 4s. Level 3s I think are pretty standard with things like the Tentomon, a couple of Kokabuterimon here for some search, a couple of Lockmon here for the Alliance effect to get a couple more swings every single turn, and then finally the Pomumon who allows you to stop Digimon being played by effects. Going back to the level 4s though, I think some of these choices are pretty standard. Things like the 4 copies of Blade Kawagumon who gives you Digimon plus 3000 for a turn, as well as things like the Kabuterimon who has the nice unaffected by effects effect whenever he's rested, as well as the old Stingmon who is a really cheap Digivolve and on inheritance gives the on your turn only, whenever you destroy Digimon by battle and you survive, memory plus 1. But the final level 4 here is I think what is most interesting, and that is the 2 copies of the Sneemon, a card that wasn't really on my radar. I mean, it is a bug, so it kind of fits in with the theme of the deck, but I never really tried it out myself. I will say though, it is a pretty nice card to have, especially if it's checked in security. You get a level 4 down on the field, and you get to rest one of your opponent's Digimon, which could probably save you for the game in some cases. The level 5 choices here, with the exception of the new Mega Kabuterimon, it's hard to see, but he's actually green and blue. Are pretty standard. We have things like the Metal Life Kawagumon here who give you plus 3000 DP for one of your Digimon and can rest something on the board, and then 2 copies of the Mega Kabuterimon Ace, or I don't know why, but in the middle of that sentence I was like, is he called Mega Kabuterimon in English? And I'm pretty sure he is. I keep getting mixed up between Hercules and Atlas Kabuterimon, but that's the level 6. Okay, and then the Mega Kabuterimon Ace here, who's just a great addition as a, Counter Blast Digivolve to redirect attacks as well as gain 3000 DP for a Digimon. It's kind of hard to see here, but this is an alt art for the level 5 Agumon. I personally, if you've seen my deck profile video for Tyrant Kabuterimon, am a big fan of using things like the Rhino Kabuterimon from past sets. But this guy opts to go for the Agumon here, who just lets you rest it and then you get a free Digivolve, which is really nice. That I guess kind of offsets and makes the Digivolution cost overall from the 4 to the 6 the same, even if you were going to use Rhino Kabuterimon. Speaking of the level 6s though, I think this is where deck building gets really difficult for this deck in particular, because there's so many good cards that you kind of want to put them all in, but they can't all fit. However, in this case, we are going to see the 4 mandatory copies of the Tyrant Kabuterimon. In addition, the 2 copies of the Hercules Kabuterimon, which you see down here from, I believe, BT17, and the 2 copies of the Grand Kawagumon Ace. This card is fantastic, gives the deck a way to actually deal with Tamers, which is very much needed at this point in the game, and the 1 copy of the Shivamon Ace. You'll notice that this is here instead of the actual Shivamon, and I think that in a lot of cases, Shivamon is great if you are setting up the board in the right way, you get it down, and you don't give your opponent too much memory, and they're kind of like locked for the turn. You've got the Tyrant Kabuterimon and the Shivamon up. It's kind of hard to get rid of both. The one caveat there is that Shivamon, when it's rested, is affectable by Digimon effects, so they can just like evolve into something and then just kill it. But in this case, this Shivamon, the Shivamon Ace, is unaffected by Digimon effects, but it doesn't give you the option protection. So you kind of have a 5th copy of the Tyrant Kabuterimon with some extra bells and whistles. And then finally, the 1 copy of the Imperial Dramon Paladin Mode Ace. I feel like as time goes on, this card just gets splashed into like every deck that has a green or blue Digimon in it, because he's so good. If your opponent goes wide, you essentially go into him and just win the game. Taking a look at the bottom row here, the egg choices are pretty straightforward with the Motimon, as well as the Tamer and option choices. Pretty standard across the board. 3 copies of Izzy, 2 copies of the Green Memory Boost, 3 of the Agility Training, 1 copy of the Green Scramble. I'm not really sure what this is here for. Maybe if you can somehow get back up to a level 6 in a single turn, this is useful, but outside of that, I think it's going to be pretty tough to get. As I'm speaking out loud, I'm kind of thinking of the situations, and it feels like maybe a Tentomon actually wouldn't be a bad idea. You could rest something, and then potentially get up to a level 6 if you've got like a training or a memory boost down the board. So maybe that's not that bad at all. Definitely something to try if you've got a scramble laying around you want to use. And then finally, the 1 copy of the Hidden Potential Discovered. This is the alt art for the card. And, it's green deck, so why not? That being said, I know a lot of you folks are wondering, where has Tyrant Kabuterimon been these past couple of weeks? Since BT16 and BT17 have come out. And here's your answer. It's always been there. So a lot of you mentioned in last week's video, hey, I noticed that a Agumon deck had topped. Do you have any list you can show us so we kind of see what the decks look like right now? And here is a great example of a max rarity Agumon deck that topped last week. I say max rarity because not only are the level 3s, 4s, and 5s, and 6s all max rarity, but also the level 7s are as well, including the 2 copies at the bottom here of the Agumon Crimson mode, like the secret chase version of the card. This thing was the most expensive card in the set at I believe around $700 a pop. Now with the Shine, Shine, Sparkle, Sparkle part of the deck out of the way, let's take a look at the actual constants to see what it provides. At the bottom, we've got, for the level 3s, we've got the 1 copy of, I think this guy is called Kalumon in English? I'm not sure if that's correct or not. but he's basically like the resource for this kind of deck where whenever you would Digivolve, you could rest him, gain some DP, draw a card, and gain some memory off of that as well. Right next to him are 4 copies, of the Searcher Agumon, as well as 1 copy of the new Agumon from BT17, and then 2 copies of the Searcher Agumon. This one searches Tamers, where the one we talked about over here searches Tamers and your Agumon or Dukemon or Groudmon named cards. This guy's only going to search out Tamers and put them into hand, and he's got, I believe, an inheritance of plus 2,000 DP effect on him. So whenever you would go into level 4 or 5, you would get plus 2,000 DP on your turn. Additionally, we've got 2 copies of the starter deck Warp Agumon. This guy is the one that can warp from level 3 to a level 6 by paying, I think it's 4 memory. And then finally, 3 copies of the EX4 Agumon here, who says that if you and your opponent have 20 cards in trash total, then he gets rushed whenever he's played. Right next to him, this is actually pretty difficult to see, but these are alt arts of the starter deck Groudmon here, the Gallantmon starter deck. The one that is just 4 costs and has 2 costs on Evolve, and then he has also the +1 memory whenever you destroy Digimon on board. Next to him are 2 copies of the memory setting Groudmon here, and then 4 copies of the black Groudmon here, who allows you to mill both players' decks, as well as pull back a Groudmon or Dukemon card, or Gallantmon, from the trash. Surprisingly here, no use of the level 4 BT17 Groudmon at all. Taking a look at level 5s, though, we are going to see 2 copies of the new BT17 Megalo Groudmon, or War Groudmon in English, I believe he's called, which I just learned like last week. This guy's great because he can destroy something, and if he doesn't destroy something, then he can give your Digimon Security Attack +1 for the turn. And then I think in Inheritance he can become active whenever you destroy something, so you can get double swings out of your Gallantmon. Alongside him are going to be 4 copies of the War Groudmon here, who allows you to play either a Tamer or in this case, Agumon from the trash, and if you can get down one of the EX4 Agumon here, it'll gain Rush and you can attack immediately, assuming you have the 20 cards in trash, late game stuff. And then finally, the 1 War Groudmon, I think from BT12 this is, who can either destroy something that's 4,000 or lower, and then if he doesn't destroy something, you can just go to a level 6 at cost -1, and then whenever he attacks, if your opponent has no Digimon on board, then he gets +2 memory at the end of the attack. Speaking of your opponent having no Digimon on board, we also have 2 copies of the Mega Digimon Ace here, who's a fantastic counter card for level 6, being able to pop, 11,000 DP or lower, and then whenever he's destroyed, he basically plays a Agumon and then saves it, himself rather, and goes up under it to give that stack plus 5,000 for their deletion threshold effects. And next to him are 2 copies of the BT12 Gallantmon, who has Raid and also the ability to pop a 6k or lower on Evolve and on attack, and when he does it on attack, if your opponent doesn't have a Digimon to destroy, you can just trash one of your opponent's security card. And then to round out the level 6s, we've got 2 copies of the BT13 Gallantmon, who, depending on how many cards in trash, can reduce his play cost, and he has great removal effects at either lower than 6,000 or greater than 13,000. 2 great thresholds to be at, especially when your opponent starts putting out some big Digimon. So dropping back down to the Tamers and the options at the bottom here, we've got 1 copy of the memory setting Tamer Takuto here, as well as 1 copy of the new BT17 Takuto Tamer. He's the one where if you have a Digimon with Agumon or Groudmon or Gallantmon in its name, you gain 1 memory at the start of your turn, and one of your Agumon can warp into a Gallantmon if you take a Groudmon and a War Groudmon from your trash and put it up under him. And then finally, we've got 3 copies of the Blitz Takuto Tamer here, who also gives you +1 memory whenever you destroy something on the board. But yeah, having that Blitz, because some of the evolve costs, especially at the upper ends, are a little high, is a godsend for this deck. In those cases where you are a little short on memory and you cannot get to your level 6s, in that case you have a couple of ways to save yourself in the 1 copy of the Red Memory Boost here, as well as the 3 copies of the Offense Training. And this is kind of hard to see. He's just kind of showing off the background for one of his sleeves, but this is 2 copies of the Red Scramble alongside it. When BT17 dropped, I felt like a lot of folks, myself included, tried to go really heavy on some of the newer cards like the new Gallantmon, the new level 5, the new level 3, the new level 4, and the new Takuto Tamer. But this build seems to just take some of the good stuff from the past and then sprinkle in some of the new cards. And for example, the BT17 level 5 here, who gives you security attack +1 and the ability to unsuspend, which is a great effect in this game, as well as the fantastic addition of the Crimson Mode Ace. You'll notice that this deck isn't running any copies of the Crimson Savior option card, which I guess that card is probably pretty niche, and so you can actually just opt not to use it and just take the Crimson Mode and then use it whenever one of your level 6s would get attacked, right? That being said, I think the big takeaway of the big lesson here is that there's a lot of really good cards in the Gallantmon pool right now, and don't be so quick to just go for, new cards, shiny, sparkle, unless it's the Crimson Mode Ace down there. But, use some of the old stuff and then just sprinkle in some of the new stuff that seems useful. And the last list we're going to take a look at today is going to be the Agumon Rookie Rush deck that I talked about before. This deck does Rookie Rush really well, while at the same time gaining lots of Tamers on the board for more resource and value every single turn. One way you accomplish this is with the new BT17 Tyrant Hikari Tamer, who whenever you hatch an egg, you can get memory +1 by resting it. And then over the course of the game, as you accumulate cards into your hand, if one of those cards happens to be a different Tyrant Hikari named Tamer, what you can do is you can bottom deck this card on the board, and then you can draw a card as well as play another Tai or Hikari named Tamer down on the board. And there's lots of great targets here. You've got the old BT, I think 6 Tai Tamer here, back from when Agumon was really big in the game, who can give you +1 card draw and +1 memory whenever you move an Agumon or Greymon card from the breeding area to the battle area. Additionally, you've got the Tai and Hikari Tamer, who are going to give you memory plus whenever you or your opponent have less than 3 security, and whenever one of your Agumon would attack, you can rest these guys and give all your opponent's security -2000 DP, which makes them more likely to survive a swing. As a way to collect these Tai Tamers during the course of the game, you can use the 3 copies of the EX1 Alt Art Agumon, which you see right here. This is the one who allows you to search 3 cards off the top of your deck and then grab all the Tai Tamers, add them to hand, as well as the 2 copies of the Agumon here from BT6, who functions really well with the Agumon Ace over here on the top left. Keep in mind that whenever you play a Tamer and this guy's on the field, you're going to gain 1 memory back. Just another way this deck kind of refunds the Tamer cost to make them really cheap so you can keep building value every single turn. And then once you have the Tamers down, you can go into the BT14 Agumon as a great way to remove things on your opponent's side of the board. So again, when a Tai Tamer's down, he comes out into the battle area, and then start a main phase, he can evolve into a Greymon card for free, which means you can go into the new Secret Rare Greymon, who is going to see the Koromon in his sources, and then gain +3000 DP, plus the 2000 DP from the Agumon's inheritance effect, as well as the Greymon's 5000, which means you can essentially wipe down like a 9000 or less DP Digimon on your opponent's side of the board. To make matters even better, whenever this Greymon would be deleted, you can just play another Tai Tamer down on the board. He also has that effect in Inheritance, which is a fantastic, which means if you have to go into your Skull Greymon here, you can use the Skull Greymon's effect to either wipe something out on your opponent's side of the board and then wipe out the Skull Greymon itself, or whatever your lowest cost Digimon on your board is. In the case, it might be an Agumon, considering you kind of, rookie rushing. You can keep him around, but then whenever he's deleted, you can play another Agumon down from your trash. And if you do have an Agumon down that's played from your trash, that Agumon gains Rush if you have a Tai Tamer on the board as well. You can then take advantage of the Skull Greymon dying by utilizing the analog use here to gain some memory back off of him dying because he's level 5 with sources. You're going to be able to play a Tamer again, like I said before, from the Security Greymon here. There's just so much combo potential for this deck. It's kind of unreal when you really take a step back and look at it. Some of the hard to see cards here, the one on the top right is the BT5 Greymon, who gives you +1 memory whenever you have Agumon in his sources. I think it's BT5. Someone fact check me in the comments if that's not right. I know you guys will anyway. Additionally, we've got the 1 copy here of the Greymon X Antibody, who's going to basically just let our Skull Greymon be a 2-cost Digivolve instead of 3. Because this deck doesn't run the X Antibody option, you're just going for the evolution cost reduction in this case. We've also got a couple copies of the Agumon from BT12 here. These are the alt arts, and a couple copies of the Agumon X Antibody as a way to search out more cards. In this case, the former being able to search out Greymon and Tai Tamers, and the second one being able to search out just Greymon. On the top end, I've got a couple copies of the Agumon Ace here, the new promo card that was released alongside the Scramble cards, and then the 1 copy of the BT14 Greymon, who can warp off of an Agumon for 4 cost. He has Raid, he's got Blitz, he's got Security Attack Plus. So yeah, just a fantastic card in case things don't go your way. And if you need a way to get down the Agumon Ace without it dying at the end of the turn, or you want to meet the Blast Evolution requirements of having 2 or less security, then you have a couple copies of Blinding Ray down here, the 3 copies here, to pop off your security but also gain memory on top of that. You're probably wondering, East, how am I playing this card if it's yellow and pretty much all of the deck is either red, white, or in this case purple? Actually, the Tyrant Hikari Tamer is red and yellow, so once you have these guys down, you have access to the Blinding Ray in hand. And then finally, as a way to just get cheap Digimon, or sometimes free Agumon from your raising area to the battle area, you have a couple copies of the Rui Tamer here to do that. In summation here, if you're a person who really likes, Greymon themed decks like myself, and you've been looking for something since, Black War Greymon and Greymon kind of faded out of existence, then definitely give this one a try. Folks have said it's surprisingly stable. I'm going to give it a try, and I'll let you know how it works out. So Future East here, while looking over the tweets and the deck list that you see here, I realized that the guy who won with this deck was also the same guy who won with the Gallantmon deck. Man, talk about having a good week. And so with that, we're going to bring week 3 of the BT17 Secret Crisis meta report to a close over here in Asia. I was kind of surprised, like I said before, not much actually changed. It seems like Blue Hybrid has held its own against Numemon in the armor decks. Some things that I will keep my eyes on in the coming weeks though, can Tyrant Tyrant stay where it is? I still feel like Heaven's Judgment is a heck of a card to have to contend with, and some of the best decks in the game are all using it, and they're all very potent, so we'll see how the top decks adapt and see if Tyrant Tyrant can retain its spot. Additionally, I want to take a look at the Agumon deck and see if it can continue to perform. I feel like it's still a little bit niche right now, and in the game where there's just these huge, untouchable blockers, I'm not sure if it has some really polarizing matchups or not. Again, we'll keep my eyes peeled and I'll let you know in future meta reports. Now, if you'll excuse me, I gotta go practice for Street Fighter for next week's Evo Japan. I'm gonna get out of here. Before you get out of here, do me a favor, hit the subscribe button, and I'll catch you in the next one. Take care.